Hey everyone, Sakurai Yasin here, and welcome to another episode of Pointy Chins, where I take you through my art journey. Alright, so to start off with, I'm just finishing up the Wraith character. So we were aiming for 99 goddesses, and we're moving towards that. So first I have Vialfa, who is the goddess of knowledge. You might recall her from previous episodes, and the colors of her, all these outfits, I have to state again, they're limited by my water brushes and the ink I had, which is not a lot of color. I have black, I have this like very intense pinkish color, which I didn't know it would be that intense, but whatever. This teal color and this like brownish tone for that I use for skin. So yeah, that's why the colors are what they are. And just doing little thumbnails beforehand, so I get a sense of, okay, what is the character? And then I kind of look at the thumbnail and try and draw a rough shape of that and then fill things in. And it's something I found a lot, which is that if you create rough shapes, it's easier to visualize within a shape that exists already, rather than visualizing on a blank page where there is no border whatsoever. So it's something I often do, which is create a shape first and then make stuff on it. I can see here the ink is bleeding quite a bit, and I'm not a fan of that, and this face just looks terrible, but you know, it wasn't a great day. So with Goddess of Happiness, this was kind of challenging because I was trying to think of how to portray happiness or a happy person. So I imagine a lot of sunny colors, but I don't have those, like yellows and oranges and stuff. So I just used what I had. I gave her this stupid hair because I think I was doing it in the thumbnail, where I kind of made this shape and then I just went with it, like pushed it even further and gave her that. I don't know why, but it seems like, well, you gotta be a pretty happy person. Or maybe you have to be like Bride of Frankenstein or something, but it seems like a trait that happy people might possess. Such a strange hairstyle. I'm pretty okay with Goddess of Medicine's clothing. It's pretty simple. Not much there, really. Again, these are all floating, which is why they look like they're floating, because they're floating. So with Olana, I was struggling a lot. So I have this idea of the outfits, and they're kind of sci-fi-like a bit, but it didn't work on her at all. I wanted to get this idea of kind of like maybe a German outfit, a traditional German outfit, but very hinted at, and it's still super sci-fi or in keeping with the other designs, and I felt like it just didn't work well. She's the goddess of food, so I ended up stopping, and it's something I've started to see here. I wrote it, mind not in right mind for designing. I've noticed that if I am really failing with design, before what I would do is I try to work through it, but now what I do is I try to just move on and then come back when my mind is in more of a mode where I can design. So then I've just doing these random faces again. I start with like a shape and then I turn it into a face. And yeah, and then I guess I was still not feeling great. But I do like the gesture of this one. I think that one's working. This one's okay. This one's all right as well, to my eye anyway. So I guess it's good to break things up, or at least for me. Perhaps I'm sure it's different for me than it is for most people, but I because I have so many different styles, it feels like I need to do different styles. So in this one with Alana, I really can't stand the proportions. But I felt like the outfit is more suitable if it was only drawn better. A huge struggle here, but I think with Marga it kind of worked. She's got this very long, extended proportion, which is kind of stylized, but it seems like across the board I'm just having a pretty bad time with drawing. I don't know why that is, but this happens where it's almost like I can't draw, or I don't see how off the proportions are. I mean, these shapes aren't very elegant. They're okay, but not great, and then it feels very wonky, like there's a big tilt to all these figures. But again, the designs themselves I don't really hate, so I think it's okay to kind of suck with the execution so long as the design is okay, because you can always draw it again another time and make the execution more polished and more nice. And then I think this was the last of the goddesses, Alora. So there was this goddess of cosmetics or something, and I didn't like her. And I was also considering changing the names of the goddess. Like maybe they're not goddesses, they're called embodiments of, like embodiment of something or avatar of something. Because they're not exactly goddesses necessarily in the typical way you think of it. But I decided in the end just stick with goddess because it's just, I don't know, it's easier that way. Maybe I'll change it in the future. But anyway, so with Alora, she's, or actually, I didn't specify if it's a she, but I think it's a she, the goddess of disguise. Yeah, it's got to be because it's a goddess. But I wanted it to be sort of gender ambiguous. So the shoulders look wider because basically you don't know what she is, and she can take any other form. But I figure it would be wise to have some kind of indicator. So if you know what to look for, you can spot that, oh, actually it's Alora in disguise. But if you don't know that, like maybe there's a small mark somewhere that you can see, and then it's like, that's her mark, so I know it's actually not the person I think it is, but otherwise it's a very good camouflage. And here's Inari, not super happy with the outfit. Yeah, it just doesn't feel I don't know, in keeping with the rest of the world too much, but yeah, and there's Wada, whose proportions aren't great, but I didn't hate the image, I guess. And more random faces, so, you know. This was probably, like, one of the hardest months, actually. This is April 2018. It was pretty hard. Here's Adoran. So, yeah. It turned out okay, but I really wasn't sure what to do with the design. I put like this keyhole thing, which I don't know why, and then I tried to replicate this design shape, but he also has this like kind of sharp design thing going on. It's really confused, and I think it shows a lot my state of mind, that I feel confused. I'm not sure what I'm doing exactly, and so here I decided I was going to do a tutorial on hair. I think people ask me to do a tutorial on hair, and it's like, all right, well, I gotta look up hair, and here are some notes about, you know, things to keep in mind: gravity, the flow, the direction the hair is going in, thinking about large shapes. So in this case, it's got this kind of, I think of it like a toothpaste on the toothbrush shape. And yeah, follow the form with your strokes, overlapping shapes, look for areas of occlusion, like here where the light doesn't get in, here as the hair tucks behind the ear, and yeah, think about values, creating suggestive marks. You don't have to draw everything. It doesn't have to look exactly like the hair, but it has to feel like the hair so people know what type of hair it is. And paying attention to things like the hairline, large shadow shapes. At the end, you can pay attention to, you know, a few individual strands that kind of go off, and the part of the hair, yeah. So all these things are important for sure. I don't like how I did this beard with this shading here, because then it goes against these lines and it kind of looks like a weird crosshatchy mess. So that is not something to do. I should have just stuck with one or the other and not combined them. Okay, so here I decided to try something different because I had done all the goddesses, at least the basic sketches for all the goddesses and the basic sketches for all the bodies. Like I did all the faces first and some of the bodies, and then I just finished up all the bodies, finished Adoran. Pretty much everyone's done to a point in terms of the first pass. And so I thought it might be a good idea to take a break from Wraith for a while so I don't end up feeling burnt out. And I was curious about how acrylics would work on the sketchbook I'm using, because the paper is a bit thicker than the one I used to use. So it's like, okay, well, I have a bunch of old traditional materials which I haven't touched in years. Like it's probably been, I don't know, maybe over 10 years since I touched acrylics. Actually, it's probably much more than 10 years since I touched acrylics. So I was quite hesitant to go into it. And here I just thought, okay, I'll use two colors. So I used Payne's Gray and Rose Red. And the brand of the acrylics is called Stevenson. And I used the Pentel correction pen and also the purple Uniball Signo pen that I use for, I think it's called Lavender Black, but I use it for the drawing. So when I put down the stuff, like this bled over the correction pen, and I noticed that I liked the softness of it, and that was really achieved with a lot of water. Like with her here, there's like a soft transition, whereas with her, there's a much harder transition, and this is less water, and this is a lot more water. And I really like the more water, softer look. But again, I haven't used acrylics in so long, and I forgot everything. So here I'm just using a flat brush, and I think I also used a round brush. So a flat one is basically the ones that create marks like this. They're very, like the shape of the brush is pretty much like this, and a round brush has, it's like round, it's what you think of when you think of a brush, right? It comes to a point, and it's got that brush shape to it. And then here I decided, okay, well here I use two colors, let's use more colors. So I added Hooker's Green and Cadmium Yellow Medium. This one's from the brand Golden. And I really didn't like it. It felt like there was too much going on, and I was not prepared for the colors, and like I wasn't mixing them prior. I was just kind of taking the color straight and then mixing it afterwards with other colors, and it wasn't so great. But anyway, it was good to experiment. It looks like hell. Like, it looks super messy. It looks bad. But all these things I'm doing are not for appearance. It's like, this is the type of stuff I'm not going to show anyone. You're getting to see because you're seeing the Pointy Chins behind the scenes stuff. But I wouldn't actually show anyone this. But it's super important to do this because if you think about it, if you don't do these types of experiments, it's going to be a while before you have to create like a mark like this, for instance. And so you might not learn how to use the brush for a very long time. But if you just, the moment you get a brush and you have colors, you just try to see all the different things they can do, or at least as many different things as you can think of. Like, what kind of marks can you make? Like, this was the flat brush on like the side being dragged, just the round brush making points. Like, what can you do with your brush? Or maybe it was a corner of the flat brush as well. And doing that will get you a lot more experience and mileage and stuff. So, because you just get a lot of experimenting. And so here, I, again, decided I liked Payne's Gray and Rose Red together, but I didn't like the green and the yellow. It just felt like too much. But again, I don't know what I'm doing, so just try different things, experiment. I thought he turned out kind of okay. Here, I started by putting water on every part except this forehead area. So this part was dry, but with the brush before, like I just did the drawing first, then I put water. And when I put water, the ink kind of bleeds a little bit. So that's, that's a thing that you can use to your advantage. And then by leaving this untouched, the paint doesn't want to go there. So it leaves like a highlight that's very bright. Now the shape of the highlight and the placement and everything isn't great, but at least it was like, oh, okay, that's a thing. And I didn't really want to look at any tutorials because I felt like then I'm just it's not gonna feel like I'm playing as much. This one I really hate. So I still feel like I'm in this art block or art slump, and sometimes people ask me, how do you get out of an art block, or what do you do when you're in an art block? And for me, changing things up can help a little bit, but more than anything, what helps me is just understanding that this happens. Like, there are going to be times where, for whatever reason, the drawings don't come out well, and it feels like, why am I making these mistakes? I wouldn't have drawn pictures like this before, although I do think the trees turned out okay, but that really just shows how easy it is to use traditional media to make stuff like trees and suggestive stuff. Like these types of brush strokes add so much for like presentation, but they're also very easy. And what it told me is like, oh, it matters that, sometimes I think with digital I don't like to use textured brushes too much because it seems like a gimmick, but you don't think that way when you're using traditional. It's just like, no, this is what you use to get this effect, because you can't do everything with traditional, so you do what you can. And that's a very effective tool, I think, or an effective lesson to learn. Is try to use the brush to get what you can out of it, and it doesn't have to necessarily look real. If you make confident marks, it'll just look cool or interesting or something aesthetically pleasing. So in this case, using traditional helps a lot, or it helped me a lot. It helped kind of change my mind or remind me of things that I forgot because it's been so long since I was traditionally painting. So here I started doing some studies because, the previous one from imagination was really not so great. So it's like, all right, don't draw a full figure from imagination, then try drawing one from reference. So yeah, looked at reference, tried to maintain the white area by not putting any water on it, and it's okay. It's a bit stiff, but that's because the drawing is stiff. It's not super stiff, but it's pretty stiff. But right now I'm worried much more about, like, can I make transitions nicely? Can I get the values to work? Like this guy seems fine. And yeah, here's what I've learned. Basically that I use a very, very thin wash here. I say like a drop of paint mixed with 1 liter of water. I was using like a big jar of water, about 1 liter, to clean my brush. And I noticed that if I just paint with water itself, after it's a bit dirty, it works. So I don't know if it's actually 1 drop of paint or more than that. It's probably more than that. But what I do is I start with the very lightest tone, and then, so that's with the most water and the least paint. First I start with pure water, then I start with a bit of paint added to pure water, and then that sort of blends, and then I layer the paint on top. So each time I'm adding more and more paint to the mixture, and then you can build up like tone that way. Because with acrylics it's very hard to blend things, or at least for me it is. I think it's a lot of people use mediums in acrylic, and then like liquid, or no, that's for oil. Just other mediums. You can use drying things, or retarders, I think they're called. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But basically slow it from drying. But with acrylics, they also are they dry darker than what you put down. So you might put down a tone and then it looks very light, but you have to remember that it's going to dry a bit darker than that. So yeah, that's what I learned, and then it just was taking forever to do these, because they were super wet, and I had to put down tones, and I kind of have to wait a while and then put down more as I go, because otherwise it's just gonna bleed. Like if I put down a tone when the paint is still like where the area is white, this stuff happens where it like bleeds, and it's very uncontrollable. And that could be fine for areas where you want a bit of variety, like color tones and value shifts and stuff, and keep it subtle. But if you want more of a defined thing, it doesn't work. So for instance, here you can see at the end of the hair how I use like this brown, and then it blended into the skin quite a bit, which it creates a soft edge here. And for hair, that's fine, but you might not want it for everything. So yeah, and then here I added some, I used my water brushes with ink, and I went over it, and here I went over with like a pinkish tone, and I don't really like the result. But in the hair I put some black ink, and it actually worked fine. Like it doesn't look like it's a different medium, it just looks fine to me anyway. I think it looks okay. So that was a learning experience. Like, oh, okay, so black works, but pink not so much. Yeah, so here continuing on with rose red, hooker's green, and Payne's gray. So when I need browns, I can mix rose red with hooker's green. A very little amount of hooker's green. I mostly use rose red. And then if I want like purples, I can rose red and Payne's gray. And if I want blues, I just dilute Payne's gray. So this gives me a pretty broad range. I didn't use hooker's green straight for any of it, because I found when I did, it's too contrasty. Like the green doesn't work, but I found as long as I mix the green with some red, then I get a brown, and then it does work. So here what I did, I wrote paint does weird stuff. It's because I noticed here that like how much the paint bleeds, and it turns into weird patterns and stuff. So I just made areas where I filled it with water, and I just like made a brush stroke with pure water, pure water, pure water, and then just touched it in spots with paint. So here I touched it with a bit of paint, and the paint goes to the edge, and it creates this fringe. Here with a bit more paint, and then here with more paint. So wherever you tap it, the whole thing kind of gets filled, but then it's still where it was created. It creates this fringe. So yeah, that's the weird stuff. I like this one. It turned out okay. What I feel like I'm missing with this traditionally, which I wasn't thinking about enough, is really strengthening the separation between light and shadow. Everything is quite mid-tone in here. There are darker areas and lighter areas, but there is no real defined, like definite shadow shape. Like this tone clearly is in the dark, but it's not a whole lot different from the other values. So this looks more like it was all rendered in mid-tone rather than shadow. So what mid-tone is basically you have on the light side you have light areas and you have mid-tones, and then in the shadow areas you have shadow areas and you have reflected light. So and then in the light areas you also have highlight. So highlight is like this, the highest light, and then the light areas are often just called mid-tone anyway. If it's not highlight, it might be in the light, which is like this area, it's still light, but then this area would be mid-tone. So it's areas in the light, but they're kind of the average tones of the thing in the light, and it's not in the shadow. And then areas like this under her neck are in the shadow, and then you might get reflected light. So this is super subtle, and it's a pretty bad example, but here would be a darker shadow, and then here it's a bit lighter on the edge. And the idea is you don't want your anywhere in the light to be darker than any. You don't want the lightest, or you don't want the darkest spot in the light to be lighter than the lightest spot in the shadow. So you basically just want to keep them separate. And one way of doing this is you initially find the separation line between the light and the shadow. Now, if your light is not very defined, it's hard to see that. But the more strong and directed your light source is, the more hard edge the separation will be. And it also depends on the figure. Like if you light the figure straight ahead from the front, you're not going to see a lot of definition. But if you light them like a 3/4 view from slightly above, then you'll get very defined shadow shapes. And so you find that line that separates the light and the shadow, and you mark that, and then everything in the shadow you tone down. So by doing that, you've already decided that, well, the lightest spot in the shadow is already darker than than anything in the light. And then when you darken the light, you make sure it doesn't get as dark as that average shadow tone you created. And then in the shadows, you go darker. So in that way, you leave anything that is supposed to be light in the shadow as reflected light. I don't know if this is making any sense, but that's what I was thinking. So here, if I squint, I can feel this as sort of a rounded form, but I'm really not happy with a lot of how, like I use the correction pen here, and I think I messed it up with that, but originally it was starting to feel kind of three-dimensional, like for me, in a way that it doesn't with digital. And I found that kind of interesting. And it just shows that because traditional has so much random stuff in it, like you have to deal with the pigment and the paper and the brushstroke and how much water is present, and that creates so much variation. Like if you look here, if you drew this digitally, this would all be, if I used like one brush with one color, it would all be about the same color. There wouldn't be any hue shifts, but here it's like this part's a bit lighter, a bit warmer, this part's a bit darker, saturated, but a bit cooler as well. You've got so many little, like even you can see if I zoom in, this isn't white at all, right? Like you've got the paper, which is creating visual interest. And this really taught me how important visual interest is, that just having that stuff there makes our eye interpret things differently. And when you look at a blank canvas on digital and you're dealing with pure white in a way, and everything is roughly the same, then you lose out a lot on stuff that we're used to seeing visual interest. We're used to seeing subtle value shifts and subtle hue shifts. And when we don't see that, things kind of look digital or they look artificial. So I was trying to get the roundness of this, and if I squint really hard, I can kind of see it as a three-dimensional form again, but it's not perfect. And trying to do a two-figure thing to see, well, can I do that? I was just looking through these are all from reference. The faces, of course, aren't, but I was more concerned with that looked like a hard pose to do, so okay, try it because it's hard, not because you want to, because it looks like, that's going to be a pain. All right, better paint it. Yes, I put the pain in painting. So yeah, I mean, it's stiff. Like, that's the thing that's overwhelming, is just how stiff the stuff is. The imagination ones are much less stiff, so that's also something to keep in mind. Here I was just trying rose red and trying to do something again from imagination, and really it wasn't working. And I was getting super discouraged at this point. It felt like I was forgetting everything. And I think this happens whenever I try something new, that when I try something new, all the old stuff seems to fall out of my brain and the stuff I'm supposed to know. So here I just ended up doing drawings like I do with my black sketchbook, which is I don't draw. I just put the pen down and I let another personality take over and draw. And my job is to just not get in the way. So, for instance, if they start drawing and I start interpreting it as you're trying to draw a face, let me help you with that. Let me put the nose where I think the nose goes. That's going to be really bad, and it's going to have very bad results. And this is what I used to do. Probably in like 2005, I was getting involved a lot, and it took a bunch of years, maybe like 3-4 years, to learn how to not be involved. Possibly more than that. I've been doing it since 2003. I've been drawing every day in my black sketchbook, and so I've had a lot of practice with this. And I think for people who don't have like different personalities and whatnot, you still can probably do it by letting your subconscious, like it might still be a good exercise to try and let your subconscious take over. Because I think with people who dissociate, the elements of what are there in their minds are still there for people who don't dissociate. It's just in a different way. So so here's just, these types of faces come out a lot. Scribbly things. What I can see here, like especially with this one, looks very sad, very lost and sad. And I think that's how I've been feeling. Drawing some more, trying to get energy. Like that's the thing, like feeling like I'm stiff. I don't want to be, I work so hard not to draw in a way that's super stiff, and I want life and stuff. And here I tried watercolor. So I used watercolor pencil that I had. So I have like some traditional tools, but a lot of them are like, I have a lot of paints that the tubes have the paint's dried or whatnot. So I don't have like all the colors, and I use these Aquarella Atelier watercolors from Romania, and spring green, and here I put in some ink wash, I think the teal on top, but I really didn't like using watercolor. It felt very different than acrylic. It felt like with acrylic, the things bleed, sure, but they feel a bit more controllable. Whereas with watercolor, it was like completely out of control. I totally couldn't. I think it takes years of practice, or at least a lot of practice, to learn how to control watercolor. It's a very, very different medium than acrylic, even though both of them were very watered down. They were similar. But yeah. So here, I think I was just using the ink. Like I was just drawing with my pen, and then I used water, and putting the water down makes some of the ink bleed, and then you get tone, you get value. And then after, I just used a black marker to outline the shapes so that they've got a solid outline. So here I was feeling this was stiff, and then I wanted to exaggerate the shapes and play with them a lot. And I'm working with a type of proportion that I did a long time ago. When I was in animation school, I created a film, and I wanted to create a style for it. And I made a style that I never used before, but I thought, well, it'd work for animation. I thought, basically everything is super skinny, but the head is super tall, and everything is long and skinny, but the head is big and also tall. So here it kind of worked better than this. This just doesn't feel like it works. I don't know. It seems ugly and very unhuman, more like a bird. And then trying to do hands, head and neck work, but incorporating them into the body is hard. Yeah, so it's really struggling with a lot of stuff here. Trying to figure it out though. It's a thing where I feel like I'm pushing and pulling, and there is an answer, and I just have to figure it out. Like how much to stretch, how much to simplify. I don't know. And wondering about these two. Like this one seemed to be, okay, that can work as its own thing, and this guy can work as its own thing, but do they work together in the same world? And it felt like definitely not. But in this case, it feels like these two could be in the same animation or something, and you wouldn't really feel like, oh, the style is different. You just feel like, no, the characters are different, but the style still can be, it still looks like it's by the same artist. Here, this person looks like a Menos Grand, and yeah, so this one, how does she eat? Like I made the arms really small, it kind of worked, but then it's like, how does she like scratch her nose or eat. Here, trying to work with more chunky shapes. And then I guess these are a bit more appealing in some ways, but still not sure. So because I was defeated so badly by watercolor, I wanted to try again. Mostly just to see, like, do I really dislike watercolor? Is it really not my medium? And I think watercolor, there's nothing wrong with it in and of itself, but there are tendencies that artists have, and you have to kind of figure, like, what works for you, what do you like working, and if you're fighting a medium just because it doesn't really jive with the way you work, I think that's a bad thing. And I don't think it's necessarily a point of honor to be like, well, I really struggled and I hated working with this medium and I made it work. And it's like, well, yeah, you can, but maybe you struggled for a reason. Because if I put it down and I really liked working with it, but I just couldn't control it, and I liked the effect it got, but it was just like, I don't know how to achieve this in a way I like, that's a sign where I should do it more. And that happened with acrylics, where it was like, this is hard and I don't like doing it necessarily because I can't get the effects I want, but I don't hate using it either. So then that was fine. So back to acrylics, and I use a hairdryer to dry the area. So I'll paint the first layer, and then I with the hairdryer, and then do the next layer, and then each time you're drying it, so it speeds it up a lot, but it still takes way longer. Like if I had just drawn this and didn't paint it, I mean, painting is fast in some ways because you get that tones really quick. You can do broad areas of tone, but the way I was using it, because it's so thin, because the acrylic is so watered down, if I used it thick with less water, it would dry faster. But when you use it super watered down, it takes a lot longer to dry. So hair dryers are very, very useful. And yeah, here I said it, I'm the most comfortable with acrylics except for oil. With oil, when I first used it, it was like wow, this is it. This is my medium. I found it. It felt the most right, but also like I didn't know what I was doing, but it felt good. But after using oil a few years later, I don't know. It's hard. Traditional is very hard, and you get this thing when you switch from traditional to digital, where at first it's nice. You can do so many things with digital, but digital doesn't really seem as nice as traditional. But after a while, if you get too used to digital, you can kind of get worse with traditional, because what traditional gives you more than anything is discipline. You can't just put the paintbrush wherever you want and undo it and fix it and like, oh, it's messed up and it'll be fine because I can just take the eraser and redraw it or whatever. It's like, no, you're committed. So you end up taking a lot more time. But also what traditional does is, so on one side you build discipline, on the other side you build acceptance, because it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to go exactly where you want it to go, and you can't perfectly control it. So you learn things like letting things bleed, kind of like, oh, this went off. But rather, just does it look aesthetically pleasing? It might look rough, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It still might be fine. It might look nice that way. Like here, I just use a black marker to indicate the outline, because the outline's kind of, goes off in places. There are mistakes. And in digital, I would be much more likely to fix all that, like erase all these mistakes. But I think leaving them in is okay. It kind of works. So that's what I think going to traditional really helps with. And if you've not painted traditionally and you've only painted digitally, I would recommend, at least for a while, painting traditionally. If nothing else, then to remember about discipline and acceptance, and learning that when you do things digitally, try to incorporate that a bit more. Like, think about it traditionally. Treat it as if there is no undo. And I think the work is better for it, rather than just putting down marks over and over and over and over again. Instead, think of it like, well, I can't just put down random marks all over the place and just blend the hell out of them. because that's not going to work, because I don't do that traditionally. So rather, I'm going to think about it and make a deliberate decision. But I don't know. I think everything, of course, and I've said this before, there's a positive side to everything. You can make pretty much anything work. So I'm still in the struggling stage. Here I'm using red. Here's Hooker's green. I think there's some Payne's gray in there. So it's probably Hooker's green and Payne's gray. So here I wrote, do I draw what I want because I can, I can't, I want to, or I must? So that question I was asking myself because I was drawing like faces, and I want to ask, like, do I draw what I want because I can, meaning because I can draw the faces and humans, that's what I draw. Do I draw it because I can't? And sometimes I wonder if this is my motive, like, oh, I'm doing this thing because I don't know how to do it, like with the watercolor. I'm painting again in watercolor because I don't know how to paint in watercolor and I want to figure it out. Do I do it because I want to? Which is very different. Like, oh, you can draw something, doesn't mean you want to draw it. Maybe you learn how to draw a flower pot, and then it's like, oh, I know how to draw a flower pot. Yeah, okay, but are you drawing that because you want to? Or just because you can draw it? So do I draw it because I want to? I didn't know the answer of that. And then, or do I draw it because I must? Which is like, no, I have to draw it. This is just inside me. Or maybe there's something external forcing you to. Maybe you watched a video and people said, you have to draw 100 pages of hands. And so you're like, oh, I must draw 100 pages of hands. And yeah. But there, inside the must is also like a compulsion. Like there's something deep inside you that needs to be expressed. And that's why you draw. You draw to express that thing. So for me, when I draw because I can, it's when I draw faces, I guess. But that also feels like I want to draw faces, and also that I must draw faces. There's something deep inside where I want to draw faces. When I draw because I can't, it's usually whatever my weakness is. So I always try to work on weaknesses. I've often been told that you should work on your weaknesses, and it's like, that's all I do. Like that's almost all I do is try and work on weaknesses. And that's always discouraging to hear. Like, oh, you should experiment and work on your weaknesses. Like, what? That's all? That's it? That's it. That's most of what I do. Anyway. When I drew this thing, I just put some brush strokes, but after putting some contour lines, it felt kind of interesting. Especially when I squint and look at it. If I look at it normally, it's like, eh. But if I squint, it's like, oh, I can start to see it feel like a 3D form, kind of like an ice cream cone with a bunch of ice cream scoops on top. Okay. So here was the last acrylic day where I'm just putting down tones and trying to make compositions, like trying to do things differently. And I'm using more of the black as a compositional element, get in your darks, but I hate all this. I'm having a bad day, or a bad month, really. Like, it kind of is painful looking at some of these, just like, oh wow, you really are struggling with this. But that's over, and then I thought, alright, back to Wraith stuff. I want to get into Wraith stuff, but I still don't know exactly what to do, because I finished all the characters roughly, and I wanted to improve and then start again on them. Like, get better at design, or get better at drapery, and then revisit and improve them. So I looked at some Shaolin monks because Aaron is a monk, and I wanted to get his outfit and also get a feel for how to draw them. So I did these studies. The thing that sucks is I never seem to retain any information when I do studies, and so I don't know, or at least I don't feel like I retain information. Maybe I do on some level, but anyway, so did some monks. Here I did the pose, and then I wanted to do the pose again, but like this one's from reference, and this one's referencing this one, but trying to push it more. And I think that's something animators do a lot, where you draw from life, and then you exaggerate the drawing, and then you exaggerate the exaggeration of the drawing, and each time you're pushing it further and simplifying it further, and then you get very extreme things, but they're still sort of based off something that was correct. So, going back to Wraith, I realized I don't understand how spalders work or pauldrons. So, this is a pauldron, I think, because it covers the whole thing. And this is... It was called a leather pauldron, but it looks more like a spalder. I think spalders are when they don't cover the whole thing, and pauldrons are bigger, but I'm not 100% sure. I just looked up spalders and pauldrons, and I of the two, I like spalders more from the pictures I saw. So what I noticed is, okay, you need a belt thing around the bicep, for instance, and that's attached to like these two pieces, and then you've got there's like little screws that attach these all together, or I don't know if they're screws or what they are, but there's like joining things, and then you usually have a belt that goes around, and then it goes up the back, and then sometimes it goes around the waist as well. So, and in this case, this is leather, and so this strap goes from here, it's attached, and it goes through a cut in this, and then it comes around. So, yeah, I feel like I learn a lot more from this stuff when I try and dissect it on a mechanical basis, or like trying to understand how the thing works, rather than if I just do copies of a thing or studies of a thing. I don't seem to maintain it. So here I wanted to do more exaggerated stuff again. And this first one just looks really awkward. It's like a circle with two little parts, and it just feels, as I said, disjointed and not unified. So here it's one thing. The flow from the leg goes up the arm, across the back, down the arm, and back into the leg, and that can be simplified as one shape. Whereas this, it's like you've got one shape there, then another shape there, another shape. It's very broken up, whereas this is just streamlined. So I really like the streamlined look. And of these, kind of like her, I think she's looking nice. This one's okay, and I like him. I think this is really nice. There's a good gesture here. So again, the style is very different. If you look at this and you look at this, this would be the Wraith one would be more of a, I don't know, anime-esque, or maybe Joe Mad wannabe-esque. Maybe like American superhero type drawing, and then this is more like French animation style. So I don't know, fighting the world. I think of them as ragdoll people. Here I write ragdoll people because it starts as one entire form, and they kind of look like this to begin with, without the face, but like how the head, the arms, the legs, they're all connected. You can kind of see it here. And here I added shading on one side and left the other side more simple to see what effect it would have here as well. I took like this one and I made it super simple, and then I tried to, or maybe I drew him first and then I tried to simplify it. And it's just the idea of like, which one do I go towards? Am I going towards more cartoony and simplified, or more, and I personally like this one better, or do I go towards this where it's more rendered and I can capture more subtlety? And in this I can definitely get more expression than this one because there is more information. So that's hard. I kind of like this guy, like how he has this super long torso. His waist is up here, but because of the way the pants are cut, it creates this look, but it kind of works. And still, I'm using acrylic to fill in, so just Payne's Gray, watered down to fill in areas. Yeah, so it's okay. So this is, again, trying to draw. I start with the ragdoll people, it's all one shape, kind of, and then I break it down. I preferred this one to this one. I wrote, this feels closer to my style than this, so this one's closer to my style than this, because, I don't know. This one I got rid of the neck, or the chin, sorry, so the head flows entirely into the neck. And I wrote, like, this part's okay, but this doesn't really match. Feels like it's too long in a way. And then I was trying to simplify a proportion. So here's a head, make the body, the torso really small, and then the legs can be big. And I think this works a bit better because of the distribution of shapes. You have small, medium, large shapes. Bigger head. Yep. And what happens with a bigger head and big hands is they are hands and heads, faces are very expressive. So by making the torso smaller and thinner and the arms smaller and thinner, it makes the head and the hands look bigger. And so you can emphasize the things that convey the most expression. And so it's a cartoonist way. And I've got this fear of cartoony stuff because I don't really like it. And I had this with caricature too, where I didn't like caricature and I didn't want to become a caricaturist. But it's like there's a part of me, at least one personality or something, likes to draw in that style. And so do I do it? Do I go because one of them wants to draw in that style but a bunch of the other ones hate it? One of them wants to be super anime style and the rest don't really like it that much? Or one of them wants to be super realistic and then the anime and the cartoony ones aren't that interested? Like, what do I do? And I'm asking myself, should I aim for this? The less simple one seems like a prerequisite for the more simple one, and both are reminiscent of the style I created for Black Sheep. So, yeah. Here I'm using some brush pen, a Pentel brush pen. I think it's called a pocket brush. And yeah, trying to come out with things. And again, I noticed the same thing as when I was using acrylic. Like when you use these very traditional media with a lot of stuff, even when the drawing is kind of bad, I mean, you could debate whether this is good or bad. I'm not going to say for sure one way or another, but it looks interesting because a brush creates a lot of variety, a lot of randomness. So here I'm playing around with the brush and seeing what I can do. So here, this is a screenshot from my film, Black Sheep, that I did in animation school, I think in 2011, so it's about 7 years old. I can't stand the perspective problem. Like this perspective is going towards a horizon here, but then we're still we're not looking up at these forms enough. It's just very God damn it, I wish I could have straightened this out so it's not so extreme. But here you can see the style I created with these very big heads, super skinny neck, super skinny torso, and super skinny arms and big hands. In this case, she's very rounded, so she's made up of round shapes. He's boxy. She's got a triangle head. Here's a close-up. So this guy's got a horizontal rectangle head. She's got a triangle head, and he's got a vertical rectangle head with this sharp spike coming out for his hair. And when I look back at it, I'm kind of thinking oh, that's pretty impressive for someone to create a style. It's terribly done. It's not defined. It's not refined, but it's okay. And even the clouds, I remember I hand painted all of these, and it's yeah, it kind of looks like a photo. So here I painted all this grass and this bench and stuff. I don't think the rocks look very good. You can tell these are painted and painted poorly, but other parts are yeah, it's not terrible. So I drew the guy from Black Sheep, tried to draw him with the brush pen and keep it kind of original how it was, and then tried to sort of redesign it. I drew this guy, trying different styles for the same guy. How would I do it? These two are unrelated, I wrote, because I don't want people to get confused who aren't watching the Pointy Chins episode. And if they're just looking at the sketches, they might not know what these are. Oh, are these from the Black Sheep project? No, they're unrelated. So playing around with the brush pen, and I find it very unruly and difficult for me to use. It's something where I don't really like using it, but I could I feel like if I could dedicate many hundreds of drawings to this tool, I would get better at it. But again, it's not one that I really feel I like to use. So it's a bit like the watercolor. Like, oh, it's nothing wrong with the tool. I think the tool is great, fantastic, and anyone who likes using it, that's just great. But it doesn't feel like it works for me. But you can get some very interesting textures, like by putting it very much on the side. So it is interesting, and I felt like it kind of suited. I wondered how I would draw cats with it, so I tried to draw cats from reference, and I also felt it would help me learn how to draw cats because I suck at it, but I don't think I did a good job. Here, I just, I found that with fur though, like when I use it the pen very horizontally, I can get some interesting fur effects. So I like that. I like the fur aspect. With this cat I was using, it didn't have fur, so, or maybe they have very, very, very tiny hairs, I'm not sure. But anyway, so I had to use more of the point. And again, there's no margin for error, so it's really hard. So I figured, okay, let me dedicate a page to just trying to use this tool and make as many lines and different things as I can and see what kind of thing I have. And what I realized is it's very unpredictable. And one of the things that is extremely unpredictable about it is as you use it and the ink runs out, or as you draw in different ways, like drawing very horizontal or something, the way the ink comes out changes and the amount of ink that comes out changes as well. So there's so much room for error trying to draw circles. It's just very, very hard. So I did these ones. I kind of like this one, I suppose, out of them. I like how you can kind of get gestures, and when the pen starts running out of ink, I like it a lot more. Like I start to like the tool then, because I can build up and I can kind of fine gesture rather than when it's super black and I'm super committed. So here it's really running out of ink. It's very hard to actually get these darks. I have to go over the same spot so many times, and it's almost like a charcoal in a way. The effect feels quite charcoal like, although it's just a pocket brush ink pen. And yeah, so I kind of ran out of ink here, and I wanted to break down what I've learned for cats. I won't go into super detail about it, but this shows how I was holding the pen. Like I hold it really far back to get these types of lines. You hold it way, way, way far back, and you hold it very parallel to the page, as parallel as you can to the page, and then you create very, very soft tones. I think these were from imagination. This one I wrote looks like a squirrel. Yeah, drawing cats with ballpoint is really hard. Yeah, because in this case you can get like the fur feeling, and then with ballpoint you can't. So, or at least you have to do it differently. I'm really bad at drawing animals, so I wouldn't know. But I imagine there's people who can draw just fine with ballpoint and or a gel pen. So yeah, here almost no ink left in cartridge, and I still like this. Like again, it's soft. It feels more like what I like to use. Whereas when the ink has a full cartridge, like this arm, it's too clean in a way. I don't really like it. And it's very hard to use, yeah, because you can't get the same effects. If you use the pen very far back and very horizontally, you still get like areas where tons of ink comes out all at once, which I really don't like. So very, very hard trying to draw a cat from memory. But yeah, it's really, really difficult for me anyway. And because I was experimenting so much and I was learning a lot from experimenting, I figured like, well, I guess it's good to keep doing it. So what happens if I use pencil? Because I draw every day in pencil in my black sketchbook with a mechanical pencil. So here I'm also using a mechanical pencil and just trying to draw and see what's different about pencil. I'm very comfortable with pencil, and it smudged a lot because I don't put another piece of paper down. I could, but anyway. And here, just trying different techniques for drawing lines, seeing what's possible. But again, it's all mechanical pencil. I think that was like a 3B lead, but it might have been a 2B. So here, drawing shapes. You're probably familiar by now, if you've been following my Pointy Chins for a while, that I tend to fall into this every once in a while, but I kind of like these ones. I feel like the gesture is coming back. So this feels a bit more like light at the end of this dark tunnel. Like April was a horrible month. Just felt brutal for me, both psychologically and just in drawing, and maybe it's related, maybe because I was feeling bad, the drawings come out bad. And yeah, so this one I like a lot. I like the proportions, that's looking pretty good. I wanted to draw the same guy, but if he had no muscles, but like, well, what would the bones are going to be in the same spot, roughly. So I drew this guy, who was supposed to be this guy before he got all buff. And then, I like this gesture, but I don't like this head. I feel like the head-neck connection isn't working, especially with the eye placement. Like maybe if the eyes were more centralized, it could work. But as it is, it doesn't really. And then with this one, I kind of liked how this goes around the shading direction. It's not done well, but it does feel like that's good to have, where you follow the lines. So with shading, you can go pretty much one of three ways. One way is this way with the body, where I just used a bunch of shading in a diagonal stroke, which is not paying attention to any of the form. It's just trying to create tone. So this is just tonal shading for value. Then you have this type of shading, which is going around the form. So usually you go across the short axis, like this leg, you have two directions of this leg. You have the long direction, which is from here to here, and the short direction, which is from here to here. So usually this shading is recommended because it's very good at conveying form, but you go around the form. And then you have this type, well, where did I do it? I don't know if I did it on this one, but you have the opposite, where you have the long shading, where you go along the long axis. So if all these marks were like this way, then it would look different. And I feel like going around creates more form, but going with the form creates more dynamism. And I like that a lot. So I find right now my favorite way of shading is going down the form, even though a lot of people say not to do that because you lose structure and stuff. But I think it's personal taste. This guy's okay. So I have him running away from this guy, and I don't know why I was writing things. I think because it was part of experimenting. Just, try to come up with different ways of doing what you're not comfortable with. And I hate text on drawings. I don't know. Personally, I hate lyrics in music, and I hate text in drawings. I don't like these word things to be contaminating certain things. That's a very personal taste. I'm not saying that's good or anything. I don't think that's a good thing. But because I'm so uncomfortable with it, I try to put it in. And yeah, trying to create gesture and make things look cool. So here, I feel like, yeah, this guy's okay. It's okay. Pretty okay. I don't like this page as much, but that hand's okay. And, it's still going somewhere. So that's something. Playing around again with shapes. I think they're kind of working. And this guy, I struggle with buff guys a lot, especially when I'm trying to mix a cartoony style with anatomy and not knowing where the line is. Like, where do you start? Where do you stop? How much shading do you add? And I suppose the smart thing to do would be to look at people who do this well and just copy them, but not that smart. So anyway, trying to do some studies from life, figuring like, well, if you're struggling with knowing how to simplify, probably it means you don't have enough information. This is what I'm telling myself. Probably it means you don't have enough information, so you need to go back to reality, which is the source, and try and draw from reality, and then simplify. So simplify something that exists rather than trying to make up stuff that you don't know what you're doing. And here, I thought of the idea, this is the first panel, and the second one of like Wraith's thing, his eye thing, like going and like splitting out, and then he turns into this demon, very like in Bleach, I think it's Bleach that has this type of stuff, but I think in a lot of anime they have it where a person turns into different forms, and then he gets this like berserk form, and then he gets this like angel or demon form, and whatever. The eyes are very, like, I don't know. I can imagine it in an anime very easily. And then here, just trying to draw. Again, this is still, it kind of shows. When the others don't come out, this is the skill I have at my disposal. I feel crippled and I can't draw yet. That's pretty much how it is. When I sit down to draw, basically, I don't know if I'm going to have to draw or if the others come out. Because usually if I put the pen down on the page, I let myself draw. And if there are other parts of me that want to draw, what happens is my arm starts moving kind of not according to my will, but a deep will inside me. And if nothing shows up, then my arm just doesn't move. It's just like I put my pen on the page and nothing is happening. And that's when I know they're not coming out. They're not. And so I have to draw. And it's like, when I have to draw is very hard because it's a lot of thinking. It's a lot of like, okay, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to start with gesture. Okay, create a line. Then what? Oh, work on form. Oh, draw your anatomy. And I'm trying to hold it all in my conscious head. And I can't hold all the information, and it's really, really difficult. And this is probably why I couldn't work in a studio, because what's going to happen if, I got hired, and then one day I do a drawing, and it's someone else drawing, and they know how to draw, and they're very intuitive, and they can do it, and then it's like, oh, good. And then the next day they don't show up, because for whatever reason they don't show up, and I'm left to just try and figure it out. Okay, what do I do? And my drawings tend to come out very stiff, very forced, very untalented, I guess. And I've often been called like, "Oh, you're not talented," or whatever. And I don't feel like I'm a talented artist, and I feel very analytical at best because that's all I have at my disposal. But I do know there are parts of me which are kind of talented, which can do things, and it's really tough to have days when they just don't show up, and it's like, oh, I have to draw. Whereas in this one, clearly someone showed up. It's probably the one that likes to draw his cartoony anime stuff, and so he's doing that. And when he's doing it, then it's really me just kind of watching him. Sometimes I influence it, or what music I'm listening to influences things, and then it changes a bit. But like when they kind of come in and then my arm starts moving, but they might lose interest midway, and then I still have this lingering feeling of what they were drawing like, so I try and draw. So I can see this one, they were doing it, or whoever was doing it. This one, they're still doing it, and this one, I'm doing it. It's a very different feeling to me anyway. So anyway, yeah, end of a horrible month for me. I really hated April, but May is pretty exciting because I get my iPad Pro in May, and I start drawing in that. So that affords a lot more. I mean, the idea of not having enough colors because I don't have the right brush pen ink is no longer a factor. So yeah, I hope you stick around to see that. I hope this helped, and thanks for watching.